Well, hello and welcome to NSYNC. I am your host, Indras Net, and today I am here in the woods of the Gold Hill apartment complex in Kingston, New York. I'm here with my buddy John Lutomski, documentarian and filmmaker. We're going to be talking today a little bit about John's work, his documentary work, about his time in the Hudson Valley, and about our connections. We've been connected in the past and literally just reconnected on the path the other day, walking in these woods here in Kingston, New York, exploring this magical land here, which we'll talk about a little bit. So John, how you doing? Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about your documentary, In the Smoky Air, that I'm going to be asking you a bit about. Tell us about yourself and about your documentary work.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Kev. Glad to be here. I've lived my whole life in the Hudson Valley, and I've been interested in, this same kind of thing that, you're talking about here through your podcast and through your other channels my whole life. I don't remember a time that this wasn't an interest to me. I remember I went to Catholic school as a kid, and I vividly remember having like a monster club and gathering all my friends that were interested and telling ghost stories, and there was a cemetery on the property, and we would watch the grave diggers come and go, and we would kind of tell conspiracies about them. Before I even knew the word conspiracy at all, we'd look into the basement windows and tell stories about how the janitors were maybe up to no good and stuff. And this has just always been where my mind and heart has taken me. So my documentary, In the Smoky Air, was my final project for my time at SUNY New Paltz as a digital media student. And the assignment was to make one short documentary and one short fictional narrative film. Of course, right away, I knew the topic had to be something to do with the unknown, the mysteries of life. And, it started, I'm trying to remember exactly, I think I had pitched it originally as, I think I had heard about the United Friends Observer meeting in Pine Bush and thought okay, we'll make it about that and about all the UFO sightings in Pine Bush. And it just kind of took shape. As I've mentioned before, the process of creating art, to me, feels a lot like synchronicity. It moves very much in the same way, where you put the energy out there, you tune into the energy, and it just speaks right back to you, and it flows in that same exact way. And it was no different with creating that documentary, where so there I am, I get a group together that wants to make it with me, and we're all right, we're going to do it on the Pine Bush UFOs and the meeting. And the next day in my literature and film class, my professor starts talking about ley lines and the Schwangunks and Rip Van Winkle, and I'm and connecting it all to UFO lore, and I'm sitting there in the class, I can't believe this guy is actually saying this stuff right now. And I went right up to him after class, and I was like, listen, man, I need you for my documentary. You can't even say no. And he was so willing to do it. And he's one of the main people in the doc that I interview. His name's Professor Fenkel. It kept flowing that way the entire time that I made the project. And then our friend Simon became a part of it, because he was running a meeting called Are You Experienced at the time, which was just people gathering to talk about their experience with mysteries and the unknown. And it just kind of all made itself. And that was it was such a beautiful experience. It was about the magical nature of life, and the making of it was just as magical. Here we are 14 years later talking about it, and you're kind of keeping that thing going. And it's weird because I was just plotting a sequel to it or a follow-up to it. I've been working with a museum, and I wanted them to possibly fund it and make it under their umbrella, because they're nearby a haunted attraction. So I thought it would be good to kind of help them bring in patrons, and it's just.
And is that the Pine Bush UFO Museum, or no? Who's that you're talking about, the paranormal, or that attraction you were talking about?
Oh, that's Headless Horseman, actually.
Really?
The haunted hay rides. Yeah, the museum is right next door to them. So it just hit me one day. I was like, oh wow, like they're right next to this place that gets probably tens of thousands of visitors a year. Like, it would be great if they had some kind of haunted exhibit or showed some kind of film. So I mean, it's still a possibility, but I've kind of just pumped the brakes on it a little bit. We'll see what happens later on down the road. I think they're just trying to figure out how they could procure the funding for that kind of thing. But yeah, but I think after our conversations that I'm just going to go ahead and start the process of making this now, because you've totally just lit the fire for me in that way.
I love that. Hell yeah. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about In the Smoky Air, the first documentary that you made. I was featured in it a little bit. I think this was around 2011, is that right? Or
2012.
2012, okay, yeah, rightfully.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I remember around that time, our friend Simon had this group called Are You Experienced? And he was gathering people from the Hudson Valley who had, paranormal experiences or mystical experiences, and kind of opened up this conversation circle. And around that time, you were doing this project of yours about the Hudson Valley and its folklore and mysteries. And I remember being excited by it, but I wasn't really so much a part of it. I think just a little bit of footage from the Are You Experienced circles that Simon was hosting made it into the documentary. But that documentary really hit really hard for me, because when I had moved to the Hudson Valley around 2006 or 7, it was right after a bit of a near-death experience for me, and it opened up a lot of synchronicity and esoteric study and just kind of magic in my life. And the Hudson Valley was a very appropriate place, it felt, for me to settle down. And I didn't really realize at the time how appropriate of a place I was settling into, but meeting John shortly after and, being part of this documentary, not even knowing really what it was all about until it was done, it's really beautiful, and it collects a lot of history from the Hudson Valley and a lot of unique little bits of folklore and fact, and the documentary is just a lovely little documentary that I'll share a link to in the episode notes here. But so John, when you made that documentary, what was it that led you to want to capture some of this Hudson Valley mystery, and how did the mysteries of the Hudson Valley come onto your plate, and what really got this documentary cooking for you?
Yeah, thanks. I realized when you asked me about it just before, I didn't really explain the documentary enough. But yeah, I think you just summed it up pretty perfectly. Yeah, so I think again, the mystery of just life and being from the Hudson Valley, or the mystery of life being just a driving force for me for as long as I can remember, and always living here in the Hudson Valley, it just kind of was a no-brainer for me that one, it would be easy to make a documentary about where I was at the time and where I am now, and so so just being a lifelong passion, and knowing that I had to kind of just put my all into something, and there was my diploma and grade resting on it. I knew it had to be something that I was deeply passionate about. So yeah, I think it was just very kind of intuitive to follow that, but as far as the narrative of the actual story goes, it really wasn't plotted by me. It was just I set out on this kind of quest for knowledge of these topics, and it all just, all these beautiful people that I encountered and interviewed told the story for me. And it's funny you were mentioning your contributions to that, and I did film an interview with you at the time, and the only reason why that full interview didn't make it in was because we needed to tell the story of Are You Experienced, and you said such amazing stuff at the Are You Experienced meeting that we end up using that footage instead of your direct interview, and they were kind of too similar to use both of them. But yeah, your presence there at that meeting, I think, exemplified what was so beautiful about that gathering space and the type of people that would go there, and the kind of things that were talked about, and the kind of and you could see it in the documentary. There's kind of this revelation happening live right there, where someone mentions something about those trumpet sounds that are often heard, earth groaning, sky moaning type stuff, and then you come in and relate it to passages from the Bible, and it totally captured perfectly the essence and the power of those meetings back then, and just the power of people telling folklore. And that's what the documentary ended up really being about, is folklore from the Lenape or Washington Irving, and Whitley Strieber and Communion, and all these things being connected to the Shawangunk and the Catskills and the Hudson Valley, and how they directly connect to the modern folklore that people are still telling today, like in Are You Experienced? And it remains one of the most beautiful kind of deep dives into anything I ever did, because again, just how much that world opened itself up to me, and how I almost want to use the word easy, and I don't know, I almost call myself a lazy artist because I just that's the only time that art really makes sense and flows for me, is when it doesn't actually take that much effort, when it kind of just, you show up for it. That's the hardest part. You sit down to do it, you commit yourself to it, and then it kind of just takes it from there. And that was, making that documentary was definitely that.
I love that. Yeah, it's so beautiful to hear. I love the way that you put that about how little work it takes, it feels when you kind of are stepping into your destiny or your calling, whatever it is, or your joy, your passion. You don't have to make it we don't use big words like destiny, but even it feels like for me, when I sink into my passions, there's just almost no work is done. It becomes just the joy, and labor wouldn't be a right word to put on that kind of thing, And so that's what's beautiful about that, is that your documentary comes from a very organic place, and I really love the way that it's just a very humble human documentary that dives into the land and the lore, and I feel like anybody would just love that about anywhere that they lived, and that kind of is what relates to the book that I'm working on right now, which is very much kind of influenced by the Are You Experienced group, the documentary you made, and just the general Hudson Valley vibe. The book that I'm working on right now is called This Place is Special, and it's just I call it a people's spiritual history of the Hudson Valley, and it just kind of collects the history of the spirituality and of the utopian retreat culture of upstate New York. And so I'm trying to gather all this history of the Hudson Valley and kind of celebrate that this place has been a special and magical place for a very long time. And there's more and more news coming out about this stuff, but I'm happy to be sitting here with John today because as I'm writing this book and starting this podcast, just a week or so ago, I was walking through the woods doing my little research and exploration. I do some work uncovering, indigenous sacred sites right now and stuff like that. And I just so happened to run into John literally on the path, on the trail, in these sacred woods here in Kingston. And it was just so crazy because John's been on my mind and we haven't really caught up in the past 10 years. And as I'm doing this podcast and writing my book about the Hudson Valley, like John has just been on my mind a ton. And, you know, wouldn't you know it, as Sync would have it, like I just run into him literally in the woods out of nowhere. And we catch up, and now here we are, like, after having done this documentary together long ago and kind of like falling out of touch, you know, just out of the natural flow of things. And we've just come back together to figure out that we're still doing very much the same work. And, you know, the work of John's documentary, the In the Smoky Air, is still continuing, and John's still doing great work. And now we're going to be working together. I think we're going to be like doing some work on maybe like a follow-up doc, or we're going to do some work just related to connecting his documentary work with my book work, and just the kind of the community that's stirring in the Hudson Valley right now. It feels like there's like something special going on, you know. And so running into John felt like it was totally part of this flow. And so I wanted to ask you a little more, John, like, you know, I know today, right now, we're here at the Golden Hill apartment complex, and we ended up here because yesterday we were on a walk, and we were talking about Marian apparitions, because both of us have this feeling about the Hudson Valley. There's this goddess energy here, right? We've been talking about that, and like, I know my book is going to be going into it, and you've been having your own kind of relationship to the goddess, and it even comes out in some of your art, which today we were even talking about too. So like, I just want to point out, we're here at the Golden Hill apartment complex in Kingston in the woods, because this is a place of folklore. And John, I know you're not an expert necessarily about this location or anything, but can you say something about this site and maybe how it connects to the folklore of this area and what we're doing here?
Yeah, sure. Yesterday we were in Montrepose Cemetery, and you know, you were connecting the things that, you know, the mysteries we were kind of uncovering there to this goddess energy in the Hudson Valley. And you know, the whole time you've been talking about that and being in that spot, I was like, I know there's something like specific to that in this area, being, you know, a person that has, you know, absorbed as much of the paranormal and unknown stories that I can of the Hudson Valley. I knew there was something specific, and then it just like hit me like a lightning bolt that where we're sitting right now is the Golden Hill Apartments, which is the site of the former Ulster County Jail. And in volume 8 of her Ghost Investigator series, Linda Zimmerman visits the jail because there was a lot of paranormal activity being reported there, like, you know, a bunch of like apparitions in the actual jail. But by far the most common and most seen was this lady in white. And that's it. Just that, you know, we were talking about the goddess, and then I was like, oh man, right. And it's like right now we're sitting, I think, like maybe 2 miles at the most from Montrepose Cemetery. And you know, I even sent you yesterday, like I looked on Google Maps and I circled the area of like just this hot spot of all this kind of stuff that you've been talking about, and we've been kind of like walking and trying to experience. But yeah, so this apparition right here is this. I think, you know, in Linda's story, she refers to it as, you know, Marian, you know, Blessed Virgin Mary, like multiple times. That's how like most of the people that have experienced her describe her. But it's this woman in like extremely luminescent, bright, cloaked gown, hooded, I think, as well. But she's glowing. She's like a glowing woman. And yeah, I just can't think of what's more, you know, Mary-like, what's more goddess-like than that. And it's so incredible to me that it's right here, right in the heart of exactly where we've been kind of walking and talking and exploring this mystery.
Right. Yeah, and I want to, for the listeners, I'll open up a little bit of the thread that runs through this goddess talk that we're having here. You know, culturally right now, I think we've all been noticing a rising of the feminine. Obviously feminism in the 1960s had its peaks and waves, and recently we've had a whole bunch of great advances for the feminine too, and there was a Me Too movement, and there was just a lot of feminine energy is rising back up in the culture after, in my opinion, what is an entire kind of aeon or era of solar patriarchal religion. It appears to me that humanity, in its spiritual development, once it became aware of spirit, it suddenly looked down upon its matter and its body, and with that it repressed the feminine, because the feminine is the goddess and she represents the earth and the physical and things. And I think also the goddess ended up becoming demonized by men, because men realized that the magnetism of love, the power the goddess has, it has power over them, and the ego, the patriarchal control function, doesn't like that. The surrender and the openness that the goddess represents is it's challenging to the ego and to the masculine. And so I feel like over time in history we've seen that this rise of solar patriarchal male religion is risen to the surface and created a bit of spiritual pride, in my opinion, and now humanity appears to be kind of coming back to the goddess. Like the goddess has lived in our unconscious for as long as we've been out of balance with things. Like once the solar patriarchal forces had their powerful establishment on the earth through force, the goddess was pushed into the unconscious, the anima. And so to me, part of what I'm doing with writing my book, This Place is Special, wherein I explore the Hudson Valley and its history pre-colonization as possibly like the land of the goddess, the land of the rich life that comes alongside the Hudson River and in these valleys. And so my thesis is kind of that we live in a valley of the goddess, and before colonization and before this solar patriarchal paradigm was imposed, that the goddess that has always been here, she's never gone anywhere, but she was just suppressed in our culture and in our mind and pushed into the unconscious, and now she's rising back up in our culture and in our consciousness and in reality, and so to me that's like part of the special work of celebrating the history of the Hudson Valley is kind of recognizing that like the story here goes just deeper than colonization. Like this isn't the Hudson Valley, like this is Turtle Island, this is Antiora, there's been many names for this land, I think to truly be present and live in the moment and live in the truth, it's important to step outside of like historical paradigms and stuff, and it really does feel to me that the Hudson Valley is a special place people have been coming to for a long time and connecting with the goddess, connecting with Mother Earth, and you see Woodstock happened here, in the 1960s, this amazing window to the Aquarian age opened up, and they even know it. They called it the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and it opened up in this land of the goddess here, and so this is what I'm opening up in my book, This Place is Special, is it's about how we live in more special places, than we think, and the narratives and timelines and the prophecies that run through the lands we live in are deeper and more vast than we know. And John is one of the great friends that I've met along the way who's been suspicious of this. Like I feel like you and I, when we met, like we had this both shared suspicion that there's just something magical happening here in the Hudson Valley. And it feels like the people that you meet here, when you're on your mission, whatever it is, your passion, whatever, it feels like there's like magical meetings that happen. And I feel like when I met you in the woods the other day, John, it was definitely like that happening, and so there's a little bit of background there on this goddess stuff. And so now here John and I are at this Golden Hill spot that he explained is a place of lore where these apparitions of this woman in white have appeared, this Marian apparition. And this is like an archetype that shows up throughout humanity. There's like many Marian apparitions. And to me, like, I want to tap into this because, this is something important. Like, I feel like these Marian apparitions, to me, it feels like it's actually connected to this, like, suppression and our lost contact with the goddess, like with the earth and the feminine, you know. And like, so, you know, it's very interesting. Here we are in Kingston at this Gold Hill apartment complex in the woods, and this is where they've seen this Marian apparition before. There's a woman in white that's been seen here. And so this feels very synchronistic because, you know, I'm trying to posit that we live in the Valley of the Goddess here in upstate New York, and that I think this land is just so connected to the goddess, and it evokes the goddess, you know. Like, it feels like in our own subconscious, like she's always right here in a sense, you know. And so it makes sense that this white lady in white would be appearing in this sacred land here, you know. John, I know in your recent video you shared with me, you made a follow-up to In the Smoky Air. You made another video called Into the Smoky Air, right? And we were just talking today about how that video seems to have some synchronistic goddess element in there. Can you tell us a little bit about that follow-up video and what this goddess vibe is that you're picking up in there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I actually made it at the exact same time as I made In the Smoky Air. It was made simultaneously. It was two separate groups, actually. There was only one person that was in that crossed over between the two groups. But my actual original pitch for that was, I kind of wanted to break the mold and do something a little bit dangerous and combine the two projects together. I wanted to make the documentary and the narrative one thing, and the other members of the group were kind of like, we don't want to get in trouble, we don't want to like get a bad grade if we're not following the assignment to the T. So I was like, all right, that's fine, like we'll make it two separate things, but we'll make the theme run concurrent, and that's why the documentary is called In the Smoky Air, and the fictional narrative film is called Into the Smoky Air. And you know, it's funny, like I really respect artists who leave their stories kind of open to interpretation, and you know, it's kind of just naturally how I make a lot of my art through filmmaking, like where, you know, I like to show, not tell. Let it be like a visual medium, and you know, I really love it to just be up to the audience's interpretation. So I think a lot of artists that do that, I've noticed that they don't really like to reveal their thoughts and intentions behind the story. But for the sake of this, I feel like it's so synchronistic, and it fits so perfectly into, you know, what you and I have been connecting on, that, you know, I think I'm okay with revealing that. Yeah, disclosing that a bit. It's so funny too, because like, you know, you were saying, our meetup like in the woods that day, and I was just saying this to you earlier today, like we picked up our conversation, I think, like exactly where it began when we first met, and right where we left off. Like, this is just like what we've been, like, I remember, like, you know, the first day that, or the first night that you and I hung out, like, this is all we talked about, and we just, you know, deeply vibed on it. But yeah, so like, to hear you talking about this stuff, and like, you know, you're telling me that you're really connecting again with this old documentary, today I was like, oh man, I don't know if he's ever seen the companion piece to that. And I hadn't thought about that film in so long, and I didn't rewatch it. I was getting ready to send you the link, and I was just thinking like, oh, what is this? What did I even make here? Like, am I going to be embarrassed sending it to Kevin or something? And then I'm thinking about the plot, and I'm like, oh man, like this is exactly what Kevin's been on about since we reunited. And you know, so my intention with that story, and you know, if you want to link that as well with the documentary, you know, I still feel that the audience, you know, interpret it as you will, but what I had, what was in my heart when I made it was, it follows a protagonist that has a abduction experience, like, kind of like a classic, sleep paralysis or can't move in the night, visited by otherworldly beings and taken away to the mountains, is how it goes in the story that I made. But he's kind of like, he can't sleep because of that, and he's kind of just losing his mind. But eventually he crosses paths with this woman. For me, was always supposed to be like the spirit of the mountain, the spirit of nature itself, kind of communing with him. And he crosses paths with her. She awakens something in him, recharges him, and eventually he goes off into the forest because of her, and is kind of like taken away, if you will. Again, here I am explaining it, but even to me, there's a lot that is a mystery, because I think, in making things like this, you could write a script, you could have an intention, but there's the filming of it with the actors, there's the editing process, there's hiccups, there's mess ups, there's improvisations. There is a magic in making art like this, where you could have ideas and intentions, but it becomes its own thing entirely. But it's just interesting to me that was my thought, that was what I was trying to represent, was precisely this goddess being and a return to nature, and the protagonist returning to nature and the goddess energy via this encounter. And it's so strange, because when we ran into each other, you were like, yeah, I've been turned on by your documentary, I'm following that same kind of thread, or picking up where you left off, kind of thing. And kind of focusing on this return to the goddess. It didn't even cross my mind when you were saying that. Like I said, there's a project I'm working on right now, and I was thinking oh, whoa, I'm focusing on that right now. But I didn't even realize that that's exactly the story I told in that way back then, and you didn't even see it. I don't think you ever saw that. So it's so beautiful, man. That happened, or that this is playing out the way it is. But I have to say, and I think I said it to you the other day too, it's also incredibly overwhelming. I feel like I'm ODing on sync. I was saying that in my head earlier today. It's and also, when that day I saw you, I was having a really lonely walk. I've had a lonely past couple of years, so it was also just very comforting to run into you as an old friend in that way. So the energy around, my connection to the unknown, the spirit world, all those things has very much just been inside and quiet. I've still been experiencing it. I've still been following that, just like I always have since I was a child. But it's just been very internal. So now, running into you again, and you're saying all the things, you even were talking about, you're following all these threads around the Indigenous and the Lenape, and these stones in the woods. And I just last year, a year ago on the dot, finished a documentary with Evan Pritchard. Did a series with him, who's for those who don't know, is just one of the premier local experts on the Indigenous, and he's an amazing person. Read his books, look up his name. He gives a lot of talks around here, and maybe you could link the series I did with him as well, because he's an amazing link to that. But that series that I did with him was on Lenape spirituality, and so yeah, it's been so comforting, so like reassuring, but like also at the same time, and like, you know, I remember this energy actually when I made In the Smoky Air. It's like, it's energy, you know, and it's like, it's intense, and
Right.
it's like, wow, Kevin is mirroring so much of me, and again, like something that's been so quiet in me, and now it's we're talking about it, and we're having these conversations where like you and I are like forgetting the next thing we want to say, because like there's so much, like I feel like you're talking about something and it's making me think of like 10 other things, and then I say that and you're thinking of 10 other things, and it's just, yeah, it's like it's really it's a lot, I guess, and in the most beautiful way,
Right.
but
Right.
like it's very frenetic, you know, and so yeah, it's just it's so beautiful, and it's so I guess like it's like a spiritual cup of coffee, I want to say, or something like that. Like for someone that hasn't, for someone who hasn't had any spiritual caffeine for a while, or like in that connection, like yeah, it's so.
That's awesome.
Like, yeah, I can't thank you enough, or you know, thank the universe
Yeah,
for bringing us back
gotta
together.
say, right?
Yeah.
You know, and that's the beautiful thing I wanted to say. That's really cool about this moment where you and I are reconnecting on the path in the woods, you know. And I actually just reached out to Evan Pritchard recently because part of my personal journey is that I've been reconnecting with my Indigenous heritage. Like, I have Indigenous heritage on my mother's side, and it's always been a part of my understanding of myself and my, you know, my understanding of heritage and stuff. But, you know, I grew up for my teenage years on Long Island. It's a metropolitan city. Like, ancestry is very different when you live in a metropolitan area and stuff, because everybody's from some other part of the world, and you're living, you know, I was living in a, like, you know, lower class, you know, whatever, like suburban environment, you know. And so there was like a feeling for me when I was young of that I was like there was not really heritage to find. You know what I mean? Like, Long Island is like the belly of the beast. It's a big suburban mall. It's the heart of the suburban experiments, the epicenter, actually. And so for me, it's interesting that, you know, if you think about this mythically, like, of course a person like me would escape the suburbs, come to the mountains, and, you know, because I've been chasing truth and reality in my life. It's a little harder to get to in places like Long Island and New York City, where a lot of other people's business is going on. But here in the Hudson Valley, you get to get with the goddess and get with her business and what's really going on, you know what I mean, in my opinion. And so when I moved up to the Hudson Valley, like, I found what I felt like I was missing as a, you know, young person from the suburbs looking for more truth and connection. And yeah, it feels like so natural right now that, like, I'm connecting with documentarian friends that I've been connected with. I just met a guy who has a podcast about water and protecting water, and we did a thing. And I'm just, and, you know, Evan Pritchard we're reconnecting with, and I've been working with Glenn Kreisberg, or talking with him, and we're going to be working together. And it feels like there's a beautiful thing happening where, like, I would like to say, like, the children of the goddess, you know, are coming together, and it feels like those of us that know something special is going on, something a little deeper than the modern myth of just being a New Yorker, an American, or whatever it is, you know. Like, there's always something so much deeper to life, and I'm so grateful that folks like John and Glenn Kreisberg and Evan Pritchard and other folks that have been local to our region, that have been preserving this very beautiful tribal connection to the land, you know. Like, there's something that is a little tough about what's going on in the Hudson Valley these days. There's a lot of people moving here, a lot of energy coming here. It is a beautiful place to get close to the goddess and heal and everything, but it's raising the rents, you know. It's driving out the indigenous people of the land who have histories here, and there's a difficult story unfolding here in the Hudson Valley, actually, that has to be talked about as well, you know. Like, and so for me, I'm very grateful that in this time that I have here in the Valley of the Goddess, and you know, I've run into some just like key people that I think know what's going on here, and or maybe not even, we don't have to know what's going on here, but we feel what's going on here, you know. And I think John and, like I said, people like Evan Pritchard and Glenn Kreisberg and some other folks, like it seems like we all know where we are a little bit, and we want to talk about it. We want to invite people here to start talking about it, you know, because the history of colonization and the history of Turtle Island, it's not all pretty, you know, and that has to be talked about a little bit as well. And we, as you know, people of Earth, children of the goddess, whatever you want to call it, you know, we are all being brought together under these different circumstances, historically, personally, whatever. But there's something beautiful happening here. And when I ran into John on the path the other day, I knew for sure that it was the beginning of another chapter in this story. And this is just one little chapter. I feel like John and I are going to be doing, you know, shows together, whatever it is, as we continue our work, because this should lead me to, I guess, toward the end of the episode here, where we can maybe ask, like, John, like, what are you working on now? And maybe, like, let's talk about a little bit of, like, yeah, maybe what we're going to do together, I guess, you know, like.
Yeah, I just want to relate to what you were saying about just, you know, being disconnected from, you know, heritage, but that also kind of means, like, you know, the land, then, you know, like being, like, you know, ancestors of, or a part of this process of colonization. You know, we're like far down the line at this point, but it's still like something that we're, you know, attached to, and like we have to be like conscious of and aware of. And it was actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do that series through the museum with Evan Pritchard, was because, like, you know, it is a historical museum, and, you know, I started to think like, oh yeah, I'm interested in the history of the area that we live in, but then I was like, but wait, like, the history of the area that we live in is horrible, and it's really depressing, and like, it's also kind of like the only story that's ever told. So like, do I even really want to tell that story? And then I was like, oh well, if you're going to start with the history of this area, you start at the first people. Yeah. And that, you know, for me, I was like, oh, there's no other way to go. That's the story that I want to tell. That's something I've always been interested in, the indigenous people, and you know, what a way to acknowledge them, acknowledge their relationship to the land, and, you know, through a museum. What a great process that would be. And it's kind of where I left off too, with making stuff for the museum for now, but for me that's okay to like start and end there with like the most important part of the story, the most important part of the history of this area, the part that's often so glossed over and not told. But yeah, you know, also the, you know, growing up in suburbia as well, because, you know, I'm from the Hudson Valley my whole life, but I grew up in the lower Hudson Valley, which is, you know, 20 miles from the George Washington Bridge, so maybe even less from the bridge itself. So, you know, it's very much Long Island like, mm-hmm. down in Rockland County where I'm from. Mm-hmm. But I've also, you know, been thinking about how, like, you know, my family has been within, I think, 6 miles of the Hudson Valley since they've come to this country. So it's like over 100 years now that my family has lived along the Hudson River. And, you know, lately I've been trying to like sink into that, like that connection. All right, so like we've been here for a while now, even if it's under very unfair and sad circumstances. Like, here we are, and like what can we do now is to bring ourselves back to that connection with the land and respect it, and try to do everything we can to protect it. but yeah, so as far as what I'm working on right now, I'm working on like a long form animation project that I've felt like very, very much called to do for a long time. It's been in like the making for like over a decade now, but just kind of within the last year, I've kind of figured out the process of how to actually make it, and it's something I've been working on every day now. So I'm really excited about that and just enthralled with it, and it's kind of just like one of my top priorities right now. And beyond that, like actually just today, I decided with how much that project that I just mentioned is in sync with what you and I have been linking up about, and how much it relates to this idea that I kind of just shelved only a few months ago of making a follow-up to In the Smoky Air. Like today it kind of just dawned on me that like I'm gotta start making this documentary. And I was telling you, Kev, the other day, that it was either the day that we reconnected or the day before, but I'm pretty sure it was the day of. I was on my walk, and I get very meditative on my walks, and I kind of just I use it as a space to channel stuff, usually for whatever creative project I'm working on. So I just kind of like get into that pace of the walk, get meditative, and just let it kind of like flow into me. But on that day, for whatever reason, I had this really weird signal come through that was just like, hey, if someone came to you right now and said, it's time to make that documentary, like, would you answer the call? And like I hesitated for a minute. I'm like, I'm working on my animation. And then I was like, but this is like a story that I've been telling my whole life, and it kind of is the animation that I'm working on too. It's kind of one story anyway. So yeah, of course I would answer the calling. And then there I am, an hour later, I run into you, and you're talking about the last documentary. So yeah, so today I decided, all right, I'm doing this. If the audience here watches my past documentary, I think the story that I see before me now mirrors that so perfectly, where in that story, kind of our friend Simon was the main character, if you will, who is also someone that has been interested in the unknown their whole life, and had a group around it. And then now here I am running into you, who has also been interested in this, and now has just recently started a group around it as well. So it just seems like it's right there in front of me. It's not at all foreign to me that I was just, I wanted to make a follow-up piece to this only a few months ago, but like didn't have any idea where to start necessarily. I just knew that like, okay, like that last documentary was kind of, more focused around the Shawangunks. Let's expand out to the entire Hudson Valley, because there's just so much here. Yeah. And, once I ran into you, and now that we've been hanging out, it's just like, it's so clear as day that like there's the story. Like, start, like you're the protagonist of this documentary this time, and like all the people that you've already met, people in your group need to be interviewed. I would love to talk to Evan Pritchard again, and all these other people that you've been connecting with, all these other experts, and like again, just like the other documentary, I already see it making itself. So it didn't right. even feel like I'm choosing to start this documentary now. Like when we were talking today, I was like, okay, I'm making the documentary now. It's already happening. Yeah. So yeah, it's just answering that call, and so like that's what we're going to be working on. I think you and I are on a grand adventure right now. So that's what we're working on. We're just following this great mystery together, and so grateful to have reconnected with you and to have someone to explore these things with again. That's definitely been a vacancy in my life for the last couple of years, and what better person to kind of go on this mysterious journey with.
Well, dude, I feel the same way, man. Like, it in the same way, like with you feeling like, it feels like the time to make the follow-up documentary. Like, it's really synchronistic for me too, because earlier this year, like, I'll probably be talking about this, like on the podcast a bit. I've talked about it on 2 or at least 1 other podcast. My Meta Egg interview with Will Morgan contains some information about this, but I've had some pretty profound experiences lately that pertain to this goddess thing that we're talking about, and I want to mention a little bit about it because it's going to be coming up on the show, and it really relates to me and John reconnecting right now. This hasn't been talked about on the podcast yet, but earlier this year I was going through a certain type of spiritual transformation. These things happen yearly. Sometimes they happen different times and places, but I was certainly going through a transformation this winter, and there was a part of my transformation where I was suddenly aware of the fact that my Indigenous heritage was something I needed to connect with more. Like, it was this missing link with my own life, because I've studied Indigenous spirituality, I've worked with Indigenous medicine and other things, but I haven't yet come back to my Indigenous heritage. Like, I don't know which tribe my mother's lineage belongs to and other things like that, and these are real things that have to be explored, but I haven't yet in my life. And some things started moving around in my life this winter, and I found myself at a certain point tuning into my Indigenous connection. Like, I wanted to stop actually filtering my language about the world I live in, and I kind of started telling the people around me that I was like, I think for the sake of humanity, I'm going to stop filtering my spiritual life out of this reality. And when I talk about reality, I'm going to talk about the goddess. And I think it would be counterproductive for humanity and our development for me to continue hiding or occulting my relationship to the goddess, the land, and life, And so I made it just was a thing that happened to me this winter where I was like, I can't play with this fake paradigm anymore. I have to live in my truth, and I have to talk about it, and along that path of reconnecting with my truth and talking about it, that led me to also some synchronicities that connected to the Indigenous sacred stone sites in the Hudson Valley that have been brought up in John's work points out the Indigenous history of the Hudson Valley, and there's the work of Glenn Kreisberg, which points out profound amount of Indigenous sacred sites in this land that we're on right now as we're filming this interview. And so this winter I went through a personal change where I just had to start speaking more honestly about the goddess and my connection to her and the land, and then start living more in connection with the land. And on one of these days that I was living in my truth and my intuition, I was told by my ancestors, which commonly in our modern language thing of the world, people call that intuition now, but that is what people used to call the ancestors and stuff. And my intuition or ancestral, information line, whatever it is, was communicating with me this winter, and I had this knowing that it was important for me to reconnect with the sacred sites of this land, which are strewn all about the Hudson Valley, especially there's the Kingston megaliths here, and then there's over the river, we've got a whole bunch of mysterious like stone chambers, and there's stone walls all throughout the Hudson Valley that are from the first people here. And I had a calling that happened. I just knew I was supposed to start paying attention to this story of the stones and of my connection to the first people and these, sacred sites and stuff. And as I followed that, I was led on a bit of a journey, and this one day I knew I was supposed to find a site to meditate at. And on that day, I went out for a walk with a friend, and in the middle of the walk through a graveyard, I was like, oh, hey, I'm supposed to find a noon meditation spot, and my intuition or ancestors told me that it's going to be a protrusion in the land, that the indigenous people called the Manitou of the land, the spirit of the land. And when I followed that spirit of the land, when I was on that walk and I knew I was supposed to find my noon meditation spot, I was led to this peak in the land, in this graveyard, natural stone peak that protrudes out of the land. And when I followed my intuition to that site, it turned out to be the gravesite of Pauline Oliveros, who is a incredible musician and just like spiritual person who gave a lot to humanity through the world of sound and through presence and meditation. And when I followed my intuition to her gravesite, I was really profoundly moved by the fact that I had never heard her story, but my bandmate was there at the time and was like, yo, like this protrusion in the land you just found is actually Pauline Oliveros' grave. And I was like, I don't know about her, what's the story? And it turns out she's really profoundly influential on the history of human connection with sound, and she created this thing called deep listening. And I was going there that day to listen to my ancestors. And so that was a profoundly moving experience. And about a week or so later, I my bandmate was like, there's that park right at the end of on Broadway here in Kingston. It's called Deep Listening Park. And I was like, oh yeah, I know about that. I've never really checked it out. I should go there. And when I went there, I went to the Deep Listening Park, and it's a memorial to Pauline Oliveros, the woman whose grave I was led to when I was following the spirit of the land when my ancestors were guiding me. And I went to this park at the intersection on Broadway, the Deep Listening Park, and I realized that Pauline Oliveros, her trust, this thing that she left behind, including this Deep Listening Park in Kingston, she left behind a thing called the Ministry of Mot. And this blew my mind because Mot is the goddess I've been writing about for 20 years as I've been expounding this synchromystic study. And Mot is the Egyptian goddess. She's the primary goddess of all existence. So much so that like all of Egypt was broken into like 42 nomes, because Mot has these 42 principles that if you live by her 42 principles, at the end of your life, when she weighs your heart against a feather, you can transcend to the next life if your heart is as light as a feather in the Egyptian spiritual cosmology. And so I had a profound synchronicity when I was led to this Deep Listening Park in the middle of Kingston, because Pauline Oliveros created this thing called the Ministry of Mot. And that site was created by the Ministry of Mot. And I've been writing about Mot and synchronicity and her relationship to synchronicity and the number 42 for the past 20 years. So this is all just like a really profound, deep thing for me. And, Mot being the Egyptian goddess of cosmic order, that is synchronicity. That is the 42 sync, And so there's been a profound unfolding of synchronicity happening for me here locally. And connecting with John has been just absolutely like a huge part of this unfolding, because when I had that synchronicity, when I realized that Pauline Oliveros created the Ministry of Mot and I was led to her grave after 20 years of Mot synchronicities, I said to myself, I was like, this is time for a documentary. Like, I can't not document this degree of high weirdness. And I think this story wants to be told. Like, I think the goddess wants this story to be told, and I'm not trying to sound woo-woo or nothing, but like, I do believe that the goddess that we once forgot is rising back in our awareness. And I think those of us who haven't forgotten her are are coming together and we're talking about it, you know. And so here John and I are today in the woods of this place of a Marian apparition, this lady in white here at Gold Hill in Kingston. And I'm just honored to be here following these threads of these connections to the goddess in this land where people have connected with the goddess for a very long time, you know. And so yeah, I'm just humbled to be sitting here having this conversation with my friend John. And John, is there anything else that you'd like to mention here, or is there some, maybe like, do you want to direct people toward your art? Like, is there somewhere that people can check your work out?
Yeah, I think there's the videos with Evan Pritchard. I think that's the most recent thing that I've published. Those are on Kleines Opus Museum's YouTube channel, which you could search, or you could provide a link for in the info. And I have another personal YouTube channel that I've kind of let go dormant for a little while now, but I would love for people to check it out. It's called The Glowing Wave Ambience, because it was a big kind of like awakening to my own kind of path as an artist. It started out with me and my friend who made the music for the Smoky documentary. But so it started out as we were kind of just making, we wanted to make videos that were kind of meditative in nature, something that you could kind of just either put on in the background or just, kind of just bliss out to, just where it would have cool music and visuals that were just ambient. And so we made a couple of those, and then, as I was, getting into YouTube and kind of figuring out, how to get your videos seen, I looked, started seeing things about these shorts, which I think, it's pretty much the same thing as like Instagram Reels. I'm not on Instagram, so I don't really know if I'm saying the right thing there either.
Right, yeah.
But it's like vertical videos, and at the time that I started using them, they could only be 15 to, I think, 30 seconds long. I think now you can have them as 3 minutes. But so the channel kind of just eventually morphed into just me wanting to upset the algorithm of these shorts, because when I was going through the shorts myself to be like, all right, what is everyone else making? Like, it wasn't anything that I was connecting with, and it kind of just seemed like it was stuff that wasn't good to be consuming. So I just got kind of very experimental, and I would love, I think I have only like 87 subscribers on there, but I would love more people to see it, because not to say whether any of it's good or bad, but it was a great journey for me. Like, I learned how to animate through experimenting with those videos. So yeah, if Kevin links that, go to, there's a couple of full-length videos, but check out the shorts. I really just made like hundreds of shorts, and it was a great experimental process for me, and I think maybe people would dig that. And yeah, maybe we could just link a bunch of the stuff that's, I think there's another video that I had made back in 2018 that also had a lot of goddess intention behind it, and very much connected to the Hudson Valley and the Hudson River, which is called The River. It was originally meant to be a series, but maybe we could link that too. But yeah, just like my stuff's kind of spread out over a few different sites, so maybe we just throw up a few links. But yeah, just still creating and plan on creating more. So yeah, I would be honored if anyone just checked out any of my stuff. It would be great. Thank you. And yeah, again, so happy to be here with you, and so proud of you. I said this to you already, for like kind of just being, answering this calling and going down this path. You know, like I said it to you, that you're just such a natural at all of this. You know, you're great at these interviews. You know, I listened to the other 2 episodes you did with Jake, and you know, they were great conversations, and you're great at leading these conversations and asking questions. And you know, you did it here today. You know, I definitely wouldn't have known what to say if you didn't have these great questions. And yeah, I just see you answering this calling, and yeah, and I feel like I've been doing that too. So like, I really want to support you in that, and I just really believe in this kind of search that you're on, and yeah, I'm here for you for it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, John. Yeah, I feel the really same way, that like, you know, there's like just a lot of beauty that's going to come from, you know, like it's been also beautiful to see that you've been answering your calling, you know, for so many years, even though we haven't been connected for a little while. It's like, I was just saying before that it feels like 2026 is a weird year, because everyone's been through a lot of tough times and weird times, and but there's something about this year to where, like, I don't know, it feels like those of us that have been kind of in our isolated little pockets of, you know, maintaining our passions even if they're against the grain or whatever it is, you know, like there's something about this year where it feels like there's like some momentum and some coming together, and I don't know, maybe with disclosure in the air, like those of us that are, you know, tapped into a little more of these fringe reality subjects, that like it's a little bit of our time to, yeah, to like let our stories out, you know, and just like nourish the process, you know, because it feels like that's, you know, no matter what's going on, the world is going through some kind of, you know, awakening right now, whatever it is, even if it's just the collective strive for disclosure that is taking the, you know, mantle of awareness in 2026. But, you know, regardless, it really does feel like there's a collective striving for truth and understanding and connection that's happening. And so that's what we're doing here, you know, sitting in the woods here in Kingston, New York, and, you know, why I've got this little podcast in sync, and why I'm glad folks like you who might be listening that are tuned in, that, you know, I hope that this reaffirms for you that maybe there's something beautiful going on here, and to lean into your passions and your joy, and to your curiosity and your connection, and to the blossoming, you know, beauty of life that's always unfolding every spring and summer. So I guess this will be the end of this episode, but we'll be having John back on for sure. John and I have a lot of work to do, so we're going to be exploring, and I'm sure uncovering a lot more to talk about. So I want to say thanks to John for being out here with me today, and yeah, thanks to the Goddess, and thanks to all you listening, and stay tuned and stay in sync. Peace.